Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit Loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Lindsay Currie. Lindsay is a #1 New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of mysteries for middle grade readers. Her books include the Delta Game series and 6 standalone mystery novels, including Scrick Scratch, The Girl in White, and the book she's here to talk about today, It's Watching. This book is set in a real-life graveyard in Illinois and follows Josie and her friends as they try to land the perfect story for their school newspaper. But they get so much more they didn't expect. It's mysterious, it was riveting, and it was definitely spooky. And I can't wait to talk about it with her today. So let's get right to the episode. Lindsay, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today to talk about the spookiness that I have read.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. And by the way, I just have to add a little side note here that I love the way you said it's watching. I feel like you need to come to all of my school visits and introduce me and say, it's watching. That was very sinister. I loved it. Thank you for hosting me. I'm very excited to talk about It's Watching today. It was a tremendously fun book to write and research. And I know that we're going to have a lot of fun things to chat about.
Yes. You had this adult reader riveted to the pages, looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise in my dark house as I was reading this before bed. So I cannot wait to talk about the process and your research and how you conceptualize all of those spooky things in your brain. But before we do that, I would love to start with you. I would love for you to give us the backstory, give us the scoop on you and your career in children's literature, which is
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first middle grade novel came out in 2017. It was called The Peculiar Incident on Shady Street. And that was my first middle grade, I guess what I would call horror or spooky middle grade book. It was a ghost story. Like It's Watching, it featured a lot of local actual history, real life events and people. And I really credit that book with helping me get my foot in the door, into this genre and into publishing in general, because it came out with Simon and Schuster. The imprint was Aladdin. They were absolutely phenomenal. They treated me very well. It was a good first publishing experience, and I learned a lot. When I look back at my editing process with that book, I'm impressed I survived it. I'm also impressed that my editor, didn't say to herself at some point, wow, why did I sign this woman? Right. It was just one of those learning experiences all around that ended up having a happy story, because that book really it found its way onto a bunch of state award lists and things like that. And those really help you with exposure. But that first book was a very long time in the making. I mean, I had been agented, for years prior to that. And it took me years to find an agent. I mean, publishing is not an easy industry to break into. And back then, I think probably my biggest mistake was not asking enough questions, not looking for guidance from people, not really having a mentor, I guess, per se. So I was kind of trying to do all the things, but I wasn't really doing any of them right. I certainly had the ambition, I had the love of writing, I just didn't have the right direction. So it took me a long time and a lot of no's. Some really friendly, some a little bit more harsh, but I needed to hear them. to get to the point where Peculiar Incident came out. And then from that point on, I really feel like my love of horror and ghost stories and books like this with like a classic scare, but that integrate history into them just amplified. Fortunately, I've been very lucky to find publishers who share my vision for these stories and understand that yes, I want to scare young readers. Obviously, that's part of my goal, right? I was very happy I scared you, but that's not also that's not my entire goal. There are a lot of deeper themes in my books and things that matter to me as a writer and a person and a mother of three myself, right? So while it's been a long journey to get to where we are where with It's Watching coming out and additional books on the horizon, it's certainly been a really good journey, like one that I look back on, and even the bad times I'm able to smile about now, which is nice.
I love how you say there is more than scaring, because there is, and I can't wait to ask you about that in the book. But I also appreciate whenever an author comes on and is just very honest, right? You have a wildly successful children's literature career, and it was hard earned. It is a long process, and I feel like when authors talk about that part, it makes me appreciate the book and what's inside of it even more when you know that. So I just so appreciate what you said too. Ask questions, find a mentor, things that adults still need to hear, and certainly
Yeah,
middle grade
yeah,
readers when they hear about the journeys that their author has
yeah.
taken, just like their characters take one, the authors take one getting there. And so I always appreciate when authors are really clear about what hoops they have jumped through and how hard they have worked to get here.
I think it's so important to be transparent about these things because, like with everything else, if we are not, then I think there are unrealistic expectations for new authors, people who are aspiring authors. I mean, it's like filters, on Instagram. It's the same concept. And honestly, I do think that we have a tendency, for whatever reason, to shy away from asking a lot of questions, of people in the industry, or we feel like we're being a burden, right, in a lot of ways. But honestly, if you really take a step back and look at it, the more information you arm yourself with heading into an industry like publishing, the less work you're going to make for these people in the end anyway, right? Like,
Yes, good point.
you're going to be, when you send a query out to someone, to an agent, right? You really need to not waste their time. And I personally hope that a lot of the agents I queried in the beginning do not remember my name, because I did not query them with material that was ready. I did not know what I was doing, and I'm sure that a lot of them, and even the very kind ones. I mean, I certainly appreciate the ones that came back super kindly, but even the ones that weren't, quite as kind, or were maybe came across as a little bit abrasive, that helped me realize that I was not where I needed to be. And we always want to be getting better. We always want to be learning. So even though that stung a little bit, it really helped me
Yeah,
move forward long term.
yeah. Well, and you certainly know what you're doing now.
Oh, well, thank you. I made it. I mean, it's, sheer, perseverance and just having, a vision for what you want. And I love writing, I mean, even if I never sold another book, it's not something I would stop doing. It's like part of my personality now.
Right. So, my first question to you then, because you love writing and that is part of your personality, is mystery and spookiness and scary stories something that has always been a part of you too?
Yes, absolutely. Do love really spooky things. And when I was young, I mean, and even now, I've never missed a year of dressing up for Halloween. Like, it is my favorite time of year,
Yes.
right? It's just my personality. I have one display in my house, confession, that is a year-round Halloween display with all sorts of Halloween figures, because I cannot bear to put every single thing away. But I think for me, the key is loving spooky things in an environment when I know I'm safe, right? A book is
Yes.
a great example of that, because it is also and for young readers too, it can be a very solitary experience. So when you are reading a book, right, if that book becomes too much, you can shut it and nobody knows, right? You don't have to feel judged. It's not like being in a crowded movie theater with friends. And if that just becomes too overwhelming, you feel like standing up and leaving or like covering your eyes, you feel like everyone's seeing you. So I think spooky books became a real thing for me when I was younger because partly of that, right? Like you can find your own niche within them. And mysteries in particular really hold my attention well. I don't have the greatest attention span. My husband likes to laugh that like it's very fortunate if we make it full through, through a full movie, in one sitting because I do kind of have a hard time with that. But mysteries are very good for a brain like mine because you are constantly getting fed these little bits of new information, right? Your brain is constantly working to put them together
Yes.
and to figure out this puzzle along with the characters. And writing a mystery is not that much different from reading one. I'm still thinking about what are these clues? Where am I going to put these clues? How many clues am I going to put in here? Right? It's a very important formula to figure out so that you're not boring your reader or really confusing them.
Yeah.
So it's a fun, fast paced thing to read and write for me.
Mhm. I think that's you've kind of hit the nail on the head of why a lot of younger readers enjoy mysteries, right? There are so many things that are competing for kids' attention, right? We
Yeah.
can have a whole laundry list of them, including the technology and the social media apps and all of the things. When it comes to reading, I know working with a lot of students, especially reluctant readers, it can be hard for them to focus and make
Yeah.
their own movement in their mind and their own visualization. But when there is a mystery, when there is that element of what is going on and who is doing it and what is that and is she scared and am I going to close the book? Their mind is constantly working in this wonderfully positive, who done it, let me figure it out kind of way that really does, at least in my experience working with kids, keep kids in the book because
Yeah. I would agree 100%. I mean, and I think that's why I gravitate towards coming back and continuing to write them, right? I mean, it's a fun experience on my end too, to figure out what I'm going to give my reader. I want them to be invested. I want them to feel like there's a chance they can figure out this mystery with my character or maybe even before my main character. But I don't want to make that easy, right? So it's definitely one of those balancing acts that keeps me really invested as the author too as I'm writing it. And it's also for me a very organic process. I don't plot very well. That's not the kind of writer I am. So I spend a lot of time writing and kind of like feeling it out, right? And that means that I may have to go back and delete things. I may have to rewrite things. I may have to go a completely different direction. But again, that kind of thing keeps this process feeling very fresh and interesting to me instead of just being like, okay, that mystery's done. Time to write a new mystery. Here's what we need. Boom, 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 boom. Sure, I'm going to hit those things, but it never feels formulaic like that to me.
well, and it didn't for this reader too, because I will admit, Lindsay, when I came into this book, I thought, okay, I'll figure this out. I'm going to figure out what's going on. And as the book is going on and on, I'm going, I'm not figuring this out. I was still in it trying to, juggle all of the and I don't want to give spoilers, but all of the clues and the mysterious things that were happening and the time they were happening and the change in the environment. And I was working as a reader in a really wonderfully fun way, but I was with the characters when they were making the realizations. That's when I was making them. And so in my head, I thought one of the things I have to ask Lindsay when I get to talk to her that you started touching upon is how did you figure it out?
Uh, so this is where things get interesting in the way that I write because generally the thing that comes to me first before I start a book really is the antagonist or the ghost, right? And I hate to even use the word antagonist because now that you've finished its watching, you see that that's kind of a misrepresentation, right? For the ghost in the book. They're causing a lot of havoc, right? And they're scaring the heck out of my characters, but antagonist is a little bit strong for them. But usually I like to come up with this person and that history first. I know I'm going to build an entire mystery around their story, around their plight, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? I mean, none of my antagonists or ghosts are um evil just for the sake of being evil. That's just not the kind of book I write, right? There has to be some sort of connection between them and my characters. That makes them, I guess, target them in some way. And so I kind of write the book in my head backwards, right? I start with the ghost. I start with kind of where I want things to end. And from there, I figure out, or at least make sure I understand my character's motivations too, right? Like, what does my main character want? What is their big goal? Because the clues that I plant in the book and the things that happen to my characters are very much orchestrated to not just help them get closer to figuring out the mystery, but also to make it harder for them to achieve their goal, which is kind of frustrating for my character, right? The closer they get to figuring something out, often the further away they're getting from what they originally wanted or thought they wanted. And I'm probably going to give them something similar at the end of the book, right? I don't write books where everything, everyone dies in the end. That's not the kind of book I write, but I'm probably not going to give them their exact vision of what they wanted because um, life is rarely perfect. And that really wouldn't be a fair representation for middle grade readers. They're too smart for that, right? They're too clever. They understand. So there's going to be a sliver of hope, but it's not going to be the exact thing that character wanted at the beginning. And hopefully that's okay because my character should be different by the end anyway. The adventure should have changed my character somehow.
Yeah.
So really, I guess that was a very long-winded way of telling you I
I love
kind of
it.
write the books backward in my head, starting with the ghost, the end, where I want things to end up, and then I kind of progress to the beginning and write from there.
That's exactly the long-winded response I was hoping for. I wanted to
Good.
know that
Good.
process of how you did that because, in my own real life reading adult novels, I am not the kind of person that solves it before anybody else. But I
Yeah.
thought I could do it in a middle grade, but you just had me with all of those clues. So I love knowing where you start and then how you bring it back for the whole reading experience, which makes me think we need to tell them a little bit about the actual book. We've talked
Yes.
around it and we've got some really good rich background knowledge, but I'm watching. I'll keep saying it in some sort of different fun way. Give us the overview for listeners who haven't listened to it yet, of course, without the spoilers at the end, so that they can now get a context for the book based on what we've talked about so far.
Yay, of course. Okay. So It's Watching follows the story of three friends who write for their school paper. So these are very driven kids who are writers. They are aspiring journalists and they are after these coveted editorial positions the following year. So they're in seventh grade now. In eighth grade, they have a chance to be editors on the paper, but really they have to kind of distinguish themselves to do that, right? It's kind of like all of us. Like we want to distinguish ourselves in what we're good at. And they think the best way to do this is to just write the best article, like the most popular one of the year, the one that gets everyone talking. And they come up with this idea, this very awful idea. And I think your listeners will realize why it's awful when I say it, but they decide that they are going to, it's how we're at Halloween time. And they decide that they're going to sneak into this notorious graveyard called Bachelor's Grove, which is in Midlothian, Illinois. It's a real place. Um, it's an abandoned cemetery. They're going to sneak in there on Halloween night because that is when the veil between the living and the dead is supposedly the thinnest. And they are going to try to find evidence of its most famous ghost legend, the woman in white. And so if you actually kind of look this up, the woman in white or girls in white or ladies in white, this is a really common ghost kind of trope, not just in Illinois, but across the country and in other countries as well. For whatever reason, like this type of paranormal thing is reported in a lot of different places over time. But this one in particular is what they're after. They want to prove whether or not she's real, and they want to write an article about it. And they just know this is going to get their entire grade buzzing. It's going to be huge. So they sneak into this graveyard, which is a big no-no, and you're not allowed in Bachelor's Grove after dark. And they get chased out by a security guard, and they think they've pretty much wasted their night. but they were scared, so they survived it, right? And as they're waiting for their car, they all three get a text message at the same time that simply says, "I'm watching." And it's
Well,
very
cue the goosebumps.
ominous. Yes, it is very ominous. They cannot figure out who it's from. It's not a number they know. And that text kind of kicks off a series of not only other, frightening events that are unexplainable and seem kind of connected to them going to this graveyard, but also a countdown. And these characters ultimately realize they have 3 days to figure out whatever has followed them home from this graveyard, who this person is, who this ghost is, what they want from them, or they're going to become part of this graveyard's sinister history pretty much forever. So it actually is very loosely inspired by the countdown in The Ring, which was an early 2000s horror movie that I thought did a countdown concept very, very well.
And that movie scared me so much I couldn't finish it.
We're just putting you through the ringer.
Oh, so I would love for you to say more about the real life element because I
Yeah,
feel like that real life piece adds a level of spook that you might not get from a book that you know is completely fictional. I think
yeah,
not only does it add the level of spook because you could go there, you could do this, you could explore it if you so chose. But it also kind of spooked me a bit because I thought, well, wait a minute. If that exists in Illinois, what about upstate New York? What about
mm,
my neck of the woods, which
yes,
which just had me thinking on a whole nother level. And I think it really does set the book apart in such a wonderful and spooky way. So I'd love for you to talk about that choice, why there, and
yeah.
and what you think it does for the book and for the reader, knowing that that is real.
Yeah. So I love this question because a lot of, not all of my books, but a lot of my books do feature a connection to actual history or a real location. And part of the reason I do that is because I have discovered the older I've gotten and the further away from school I've gotten that I love history. When I was in, middle school and high school, I genuinely thought that was the subject I liked the least. I think I associated history with just like memorization and wars. And I don't really think I realized that local history, or what I call forgotten history, things that people really don't remember, or even going a step further than that, maybe it's remembered but it has been mistold over the years, right? And kind of quirky obscure history, these are history, right? It's just not necessarily what you would be learning in school, but it still applies. Geographically it matters, right, where you came from and the history of that place. So I really nerd out over finding history like Bachelor's Grove, where you have this very, very long time period of things happening in this graveyard, many of which seem like unbelievable, right? Bachelor's Grove is very unique because no one has been buried there since the 80s, since 1980s. But it's been largely abandoned and it's been atrociously treated over the years. It's very desecrated. I mean, I believe the current count of people buried there is over 100, but I mean, there's only 20 some headstones there, period. Because, apparently someone wakes up in the morning and decides that what they need for their lawn is a gravestone. I don't understand that, but like it has happened. And that really kind of got me thinking about featuring it for a couple of reasons. So one is, yes, it's scary. Like on the surface, this is a scary graveyard. It is in the middle of a forest preserve. You cannot just drive up and park in a parking lot and walk into this thing. You have to hike through a quarter, half mile of timber to get to it. On this trail that's very isolated and very spooky feeling, right? So it is a scary setting. Um, but the other reason, and probably the more important reason that I wanted to feature it, is again, the notion of all of these people being interred there and there not being any evidence of them um, was saddening to me. This is a place that people, um, s- families believed would be a beautiful permanent resting place for these people. And there's something very unsettling about there being no evidence of them in there. And so I kind of wanted to I guess, feature it not just from the scary aspect, but also feature it because, and I think one of the trade reviews I got on It's Watching, said it best, quite frankly. They said because to remember the past is to honor it. And I thought that's such a beautiful sentiment, and that's very much what I was thinking when I chose this location to feature. But yes, you're right. I do think it adds a layer of kind of terror because these things did actually exist, and there are so many legends about this graveyard, and people have had such wild experiences in and near it.
Yeah, it was making me feel grateful that I was in upstate New York and
Yes.
not around there. And
Yes.
I'm talking about the level of spook because there is this wonderful level of spook that kids are just going to sink into, but there is much more. There are other deeper themes here that can go right to readers' hearts just as quickly as the wonderful mystery, the friendship, right? The
Mhm.
friendship of these three kids is just so beautiful. You've got this typical, trio of friends, but each friend is a little bit different. Each friend has their own life and life events and where the parents are and how the parents stay connected. And some are going through loss, and there's just so much complexity in this friendship that I want to make sure I point out that yes, this is a mystery, and yes, it is spooky, but yes, there are themes, and friendship is only one of them. But I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and the beautiful friendship that your characters have.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate that because that is an important feature in all of my books. Spooky or not spooky, because I do kind of write two different kinds of mysteries, and we can talk about that a little later. But I do think that one of the big things that virtually all of us remember from middle school, regardless of our age or our position in life or wherever we are on kind of our life journey, is we remember the friendship dynamics in middle grade and how hard those were.
Yes.
And your friends, the people that you surrounded yourself with, you relied on them for so much. You relied on them to validate you in so many ways. You relied on them to support you, but you also needed to be a support for them. And so it's important to me to show friendships that are flawed, right? Like they're not perfect, but also friendships where the kids are capable of recognizing each other for their strengths and what they bring to the friendship and lifting each other up when things get bad instead of tearing each other down, right? Because we've all seen dark times where you can really tell who is there to support you, and you need these people around you. We need these people around us no matter what age we're at. So um Josie and Jackson and Allison definitely come to mind as characters that I love because, as you pointed out, they're all kind of struggling with individual things, right? I would describe Josie as very driven, very focused. She's kind of eyes on the prize type person. And I think, without giving anything away, over the course of the book, she really kind of has to soften a little bit and um, make some concessions, right? Realize that everything isn't always going to be perfect. And maybe there's a bigger picture she may have been missing. And Jackson is going through some heartache on his end. So everything involving Bachelor's Grove and this mystery in general is hitting him in a different way than it would Allison and Josie, and showing them recognize that and accept that and try to help him through that, I think is really important. And Allison, I love Allison because on the surface she looks like the cool, polished girl. She knows how to do makeup. Like she's flawless, and yet she really is a lot more layered than that, and very, very fun. And again, also struggling with her own things, right? I mean, I think that's the thing about everyone is that you don't know what they are going through. Unless you have walked in their shoes, you don't understand. So I love showing these characters actually caring about each other, caring enough to ask questions, caring enough to pry a little bit, because sometimes when we become adults, we don't do that as much as we should. So I'm glad you point them out because they are very, I think, special characters.
They are. They're beautiful model for kids, and I think they're beautiful models for adults that our world needs today too.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Thank you.
yeah, this is a book for kids. This is a book for adults, but I think you've done that same thing where you're showing the complexity of the friends, you're showing the different sides of them, you're showing that we might not understand what's going on the inside. We may have misconceptions. You're doing that with the friends, and without spoilers, you're perhaps doing that with another being or beings
Yes.
as well. And that theme came through loud and clear too. And I can't say much about it because if I do, then the whole story
I
will unravel here on the podcast. But that friendship theme extends into what do we know about those that are around us? What assumptions do we make? What do we overlook, perhaps, that
Yeah.
is there on a deeper level? And the thing that I love the most, though, I think, is that the kids do this without any parents for the entire weekend,
Yes.
which,
Yep.
might possibly be a middle schooler's dream
Yes.
as they are reading this book.
Yes.
But I feel like that choice really puts the story front and center on that friendship, on those actions, on that learning. But there is a character that I think I can mention without spoiling. Let's just say there's a character that ends up giving that trio some information and helping them out. And what struck me about that character, one of the only couple of adults that they I guess go to for help or for
Yeah.
information, was the trust that she had in these kids to figure
Yeah.
this out and do the right thing
Yeah.
and make things better. And I remember just feeling all warm and fuzzy inside, thinking if I had an adult who just trusted and intuitively knew, like, you've got this, how
Yeah.
that would feel. And yes, this is in the context of ghosts and spookiness, but I just thought it was like a hug to my inner child of someone believes in you. And it made me tear up at a moment when she was very clear of that belief. And I thought, oh, for a child to read this and to know that they are capable of this, I loved it.
I'm so glad you bring this up because I spend a huge part of my job and a huge chunk of my every year is spent in schools with middle graders, right? Like kids in this age group. And the thing is, I think they are so quickly and easily boiled down and stereotyped by a lot of people, mostly adults, right? And they are clever, they are empathetic, they are up for adventure, and they are way smarter than people often give them credit for.
Yes.
And so, kind of taking this, almost 80s notion, right? Of kids, think of the movie The Goonies, right? Like that pops into my head all the time as, a group of kids who kind of set out to solve some sort of problem, a big problem that the adults kind of had thrown their hands up in the air over. Like, nothing we can do about it. We've done everything we can. But kids think differently, right? They aren't they don't hold themselves to the same restraints that we do as adults. And even though adults are important in my books and the parents are always, in my books, there is some facet of them. It's also important to me to show that they have their own problems.
Yes.
I mean, and without giving anything away, Josie's parents are struggling with something right now. It's not like they're just fully absentee parents. They're going through it on their end. And Josie understands that, right? Middle graders are capable of understanding and respecting these things. They are not just a bunch of self centered little people, like walking around in their own bubbles. They're really not. And so I appreciate the fact that they find their own way to do this that seems safe and fair, and that there is this other adult who's able to come in and acknowledge what she sees in their personalities and in their friendship. And, she is cautious to, I think, make sure to impress upon them safety, right? I don't think it would be a good message or a realistic message if this adult genuinely felt like, there was imminent danger and she walked away. But I also do think that she knew that they had a grasp on this and what needed to be done. And that quite frankly, they were the people that needed to do it.
Yes.
Because sometimes it is your responsibility, not a parent's responsibility, right? To fix it for you. So I love that message.
Yeah. And that message leads so nicely to the end of the book that we won't talk about, but the elements of doing something and doing something that helps, and even a level of activism around something that came from them, that
Yes.
came from the kids, that could have never have competed with their original goal of writing the
Yeah,
best article ever. It loops
absolutely.
back to what you
Absolutely.
said about that sliver of hope, and maybe it's different. It just, from the friendship to the the belief in the kids to figure it out and do the right thing, to what happens at the end. Oh, it's just wonderful.
Oh, I love you so much for saying that. Thank you. And I mean, for your listeners who can't see, what when I hold up like a copy of the book or something, I will say this book is, I'm very lucky to work with a amazing editor at Delacorte who understood kind of my vision for that message as well and helped me integrate front and back matter into this book that supports it.
Yes.
So we have a beautiful hand-drawn map in the beginning of the book of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, kind of showing like, the destruction and what headstones are still there. And then in the back, we have photographs, black and white photographs as well that, were taken. And my author's note is very detailed as well about my research, about the people who helped me research. And my hope is that as young readers are making their way through this journey and reading, that they will investigate along with my characters, they will learn along with my characters, and that they, in the end, will walk away, like you said, with some notion of activism or, hey, I cannot change what has happened in the past, but I can certainly impact the future. And if this is something that I feel strongly about, if this really resonated with me and I care, here are ways that I can get involved.
Yes. That was, well, there was a line at the end that's highlighted and sticky noted and is written on a sticky note that is now in my quote journal because I loved it, which was, we can't erase the past, but we can change the future, dot, 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 one article at a time. And I imagine that we could replace article with something else that is meaningful for
Yes.
kids too, and does embrace that it just that idea of kids got this. If we
Yeah.
let them, right? If the parents are out of the way a little bit and let them
Yep.
rise to the
Yes.
occasion,
Yes.
and they do.
Let them do some things, right? Let them brainstorm. Let them follow their passions and their creativity and let them try to fix things, now and again. And I think the future rests with them, right? Books that they're reading now are going to shape them. They're going to shape their personalities, their interests, their character. And so I think that's a big part of why I return to writing books like this. I mean, they're fun. It's super fun to be scared. It is super fun to have these, and for everybody listening, again, if you have not read one of my books, I don't write gore in them. I think that's pretty important to cover. When I use the word horror, I think that elicits in a lot of people a very harsh, like, ooh, she's writing gory stuff. There is no blood in my books. My books rely on, I guess, like more classic paranormal scares, kind of mess with your mind stuff, but it's not going to be anything bloody. But yeah, I think that's why I keep coming back to writing this kind of thing because it's fun on so many levels. But also when I finish, like you said, you kind of have these like warm fuzzies, and this is absolutely not a genre, but I 100% think it should be heartwarming horror.
Oh,
Heartwarming
yes.
horror, right? That would be my area, 100%.
I am totally writing it down, which means that is a new genre.
I mean, I love the idea because I mean, really,
Yes.
you never finish one of my books and you're like, you know, everything was grim. And yes, they do deal, I think, with some sensitive things, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you really can't have a ghost story unless you have death. But at the same time, I do think you walk away with more of those warm fuzzies than you would ever expect to get from a book labeled horror. That is a scary label to a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, that really is perfect because as I mentioned, reading it at night and starting off, I'm looking over my shoulder, I'm jumping at all of the noises, but then finishing at night, I'm hugging it. So I mean, you did have
You're like,
all
oh,
of it. Yeah, heartwarming horror. Yes,
there it is.
just
We're
new
starting a
genres
new
born.
trend. We're starting a new trend.
Now, talk to me about some of the books that are on the horizon. If
Mm.
no, you have this heartwarming horror, but you write a lot. So tell us what's up next that you could give us a peek into.
So I have two books releasing in the not so distant future. So I do have, this is a two-book year for me. So It's Watching just came out this month, earlier this month, but then later on in October, I have another release called The House with No Keys. The House with No Keys is technically the sequel to a book that came out last April called The Mystery of Locked Rooms. Those fall under the umbrella of a series called the Delta Games. And they are mysteries. They are very fast paced. So they have that in common. They do have a lot of really strong friendship themes. So they have that in common with It's Watching and my spooky books. But the thing they do not have in common is there's no spook factor. There is no scary element. They are very much adventure mysteries along the lines of some close comps I could give would be like the Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library series. And I referenced the Goonies earlier. It has a very strong Goonies-esque feel because those books are set in an escape room environment and there is a treasure at stake. So without giving away too much, about the book, I mean, those are just a different type of mystery. There's a lot of puzzles and riddles and ciphers and things like that involved. And if you like escape rooms, that's going to be a series I think you're going to like. I should be able to reveal the cover for book two really soon, like hopefully this week. It's going to be revealed by a dear friend and really talented author, John Shu. Um,
Love John
so
Chu on the
who does not
podcast.
love John Shu? I mean, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't love John Shu.
No.
He is the ultimate in kindness.
Yeah.
And so I'm really, really grateful he's going to reveal that for me. But then on the spooky front, next year, again in February in 2026, I almost lost track of what year we're in 2026. I have another spooky book coming out with Delacourt called X Marks the Haunt. And this book is really important to me. It is set in Graceland Cemetery, which is my favorite cemetery in the entire world. Some people may not have a favorite cemetery, but I do. This one is in Chicago. It is filled with history and legends and cool architecture. I cannot say enough about how special of a place it is and how special the people are who work there. And that's actually what kind of um, prompted me to write the book because the main character's mother is the director at Graceland in the book. And I was given the opportunity to shadow the director last summer for big chunks of the summer. So I was able to get an inside look at what a cemeterian does. Um, it's a very mysterious industry, right? The death industry is something that none of us really know very much about. We don't really want to be part of it because by the time we're part of it, we're experiencing grief and loss. But what we don't know about it is how much of it is mystery, right? Is genealogy. How many things they are doing that have nothing to do with digging graves or what normally pops into our head. And so writing that book is really very much, it is scary. It's like It's Watching. It has some very, very scary scenes. It might be a little scarier than It's Watching. So, I'm telling you that specifically.
Thank you.
Make sure you
Well
read it with
prepared.
a night light. Please leave a light on. But I also think that a lot of the themes that you found meaningful to you in It's Watching are going to come out as well in that book. And it really is very much a love letter to that place and the history and the people who care for it and why it matters. Why does it matter? Why does it matter what these people do? And why does it matter that there's a ghost, what besides not wanting to be haunted. So I really, really cannot talk enough about how excited I am about that book. And it also happens to feature my first male main character. The main character's name is Will, and I adore him. He's kind and empathetic, but also flawed, like we talked about. He's a very realistic character, but one very, very close to my heart. So I think readers are going to love him. I hope they love him. Please love Will. I love him.
It sounds like they will. I'm a little frustrated now though that I have to wait until February of
I
2026
know,
for
I
that one.
know, I know. I will say though, I did see a glimpse of kind of the direction of the cover for this book, and the illustrator is one that has illustrated other books of mine. So it found us, and the paperback of The Girl in White were both illustrated by Marcella Bolivar. Um, Haunting, visually beautiful, very dark, again, but really, really incredible. So at least there's stuff coming soon.
Yes.
I mean, for the full book, we may have to wait a little while, but stuff is coming.
Yes. It's worth it.
It's
Totally
worth
worth
it.
it.
I really, really, really loved writing that book. And I've loved writing every book, but that one holds a very special place in my heart. So I'm excited to have that come out. And I have a great team supporting me behind that book. So I hope it's gonna do good things.
Awesome. Well, where can listeners find you online to keep up with you, to keep track of that book, the other books that are coming out? Where's the best place to find you?
I feel like every author is asking this question every single day right now because we don't the landscape of social media has changed so much in the past year. I would say probably the best place to find me, no matter what, is always my website.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's just my name, lindsaykirrie.com. I post updates there. There is a section for all of my books there. For educators, there are discussion guides there. For readers, there are character quizzes, and there is an interactive map of Chicago with haunted locations marked. I mean, they can do their own little ghost tour, a virtual ghost tour. There's a lot of information on my website, and that is updated really, really regularly. You can also find me on Instagram. That's probably the main place where I would post big news, and that's at Lindsay N. Currie. And I really feel like those are the two you know, best places in terms of Lindsay posts her regularly
Yes.
places, right? There are a bunch of places I could tell you, but you would discover I'm horrible at keeping them updated. So we just won't talk about them.
I think we all are. It's so hard to keep
It's
track
so
of
hard to
everything.
find where you're supposed to be, and for a while I really did try to be everywhere. And I just I want to spend more time on the writing. And so it's really not possible to be everywhere and be posting everything in 20 different places every time. So I'm just going to focus on those locations and really hope that my readers and people find me.
Well, I will put links to the website, to
Thank
Instagram,
you.
of course, to the books that we talked about today that at least we can get our hands on at the moment. I will put those
Yeah.
into the show notes to make it as easy as possible for people to find you and
Thank you.
follow you. And oh, I just want to say thank you. This was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to get the backstory behind all of it, the spook, the deeper themes, and now have another book to look forward to. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much. This was really, really fun. I appreciate you and all of your amazing questions. And thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Oh gosh, you're most welcome. Thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.